So we are recording. I'm just gonna make a small introduction. So welcome everybody. I'm Karsten, and actually my name is not there yet because my computer just crashed. I'm Karsten. I'm with EcoTribe and ThriveTribe Global, and I have the honor to be speaking to Sarah Savory, that will introduce herself a little bit. I've been following her work for some time now. You are the daughter of the legendary Alan Savory. Yeah, for me, he's legendary. For you, it's probably just your father, obviously. And there's this normality for it. I think all his work is really making a dent in this on planet Earth, a very positive one. And I'm super curious to know what it's like for you. And so I really, I've been following your stuff, your content that you've been putting up. I love the way that you put things out there. And I want to know more. I want to know more about who you are, what it's like to be you, and also all these little things that all of us can do to have, to be co-creative or to be participating in this change that we actually want to see, and that you speak so well into. So welcome.
Thank you, Karsten. Thanks for having me. Excuse the very busy background. I'm not at home because I have no Wi-Fi, so I had to rush to a friend's house to come and do this. That's the joys of Zimbabwe at the moment. We have no electricity for most of the day. So yeah, you introduced me. I'm Sarah Savory. I'm Alan's youngest daughter. And yeah, I grew up knowing words like ecological consultant and stuff like that. I never really fully understood what my dad did, or understood the framework, the decision-making framework, until much later in life. And so I understood it was all about regenerating land, and I'm very passionate about wildlife and things like that. And then I kept challenging my father to simplify what he did. And I was like, no, you lost me, do it again. And then in frustration, once I really got a hold of it, I was like, okay, well, I have to simplify this further because we have to teach children. And so my journey was kind of, I'd already written a children's book a while ago, just because I got irritated with people not knowing what a pangolin was. That's how this all sort of came about. My educational work is
what is?
See, a pangolin. It's a. Okay. We can put a picture of a pangolin on your Anyway, I wrote this book in frustration, and it did really well and got picked up by Penguin Random House and all of this. And then I was like, that's what I have to do. I have to teach this through story and children's books. And so that's how it sort of began. And then there was a teacher in Zimbabwe here who just said to me the one day, he said, why don't you come and just teach holistic management to my environmental and agricultural students? And I went in there, and there was between 16 and 18, so last 2 years of school, senior school. And I went in there thinking I knew what I was doing, and knew about holistic decision making and ecological literacy. And I got absolutely schooled by those children. I thought, I know nothing. I don't know how to teach this. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to simplify it, because I was going to go through my dad's book sort of chapter by chapter and simplify bits of the chapters. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I got in there and I went, wow, can't do it like that. And so that began quite a long journey of teaching these kids for a couple of years. And then lockdowns started, and which was a very good thing, because I got invited to teach some very small kids. and they were between 8 and 10 years old, and there were no schools open. So this was a school that was open because it was a homeschool, and I went in there and there were about 10 kids. And again, I thought I knew what I was doing, and I thought I'd learned from those older kids. And then I got in this classroom and it's like, wow, no.
They're even more challenging, isn't it?
Well, it was me. I wasn't simplifying it enough, and I wasn't teaching it well. Yeah. Because it is simple once you understand it. So these kids were amazing, and within 9 1-hour lessons, I had them managing complexity. I had them with their own holistic context. I had them understanding the decision-making side and the ecological literacy side, and the tool of livestock is easy for kids to pick up and accept. So, and actually I was teaching that class this morning and had another big sort of just aha moment with them of how to simplify it for their parents, because we're doing like a little Christmas presentation for the end of the year in each subject that they do and holistic management. So I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Lorax. It's a doctor. It's really interesting because it's called The Lorax, and it's like it's all about this guy that goes and basically cuts down all the trees and destroys the environment, and the sort of the knock-on consequences of it and whatever. And then he cuts down the last tree, and that's the end of his big business and enterprise, but he's destroyed everything. And so we're doing that so the kids are going to read the Lorax to their parents, and then they're going to show the parents how those decisions wouldn't have been made if they had a holistic context and framework to work towards, and to tie their physical and financial stability to the environmental health. So like this morning we were going through it and we read through the Lorax, and I said, okay, well, I always put them separate, how we make decisions, like people, money, nature. And I said, well, how has he made these decisions? And they said, well, he only looked at it from the point of view of making money. So after we read the book, I just went through it and we asked the holistic filtering questions. And I said, well, how did this affect people, his family and his friends and people that came and lived off him and helped him in his factory? And I said, short term, it was great for them, but long term, they all lost their jobs and their livelihoods and everything. And so we just went through it like that. So today was a big sort of breakthrough in just simplifying and practical examples of it. I also use an example with Play-Doh where we like have 3 different colors of Play-Doh and say that's people, that's money, that's nature. And then we mix them all together and ask adults to say, like, can you separate the inseparable and manage them? So that's what they're doing.
You're speaking into the is it the 7 context checks, isn't it?
Well, with the little ones, we do 5. So we just simplify them very much because they're not making very, very big decisions at that age. But we say, if I take this action, is it addressing the root cause of the problem I'm trying to solve? And just say, think about why the problem started in the first place. And then they say, how will this action affect my relationship with others? How will this action affect my livelihood or my income? How will this action affect nature? And then how do we feel about this action now? So they do very simple. But yeah, so it's been really exciting. And I'm at the moment just beginning to put together a workbook for schools where we go through and teach kids, because I couldn't teach the teachers. And so I was sort of chasing my tail quite a bit, because then after I taught at the older school at St. Christopher's, I thought, well, now I can train teachers. But the teachers weren't picking it up and the kids were. So now that I've simplified it so much, I'm going to start training teachers again with this simplified material. And even if they don't pick it up, I hope the workbook will be so simple that the teachers can just follow it and the kids will pick it up and teach the teachers.
That's beautiful. It's
Amazing.
amazing how hardwired we get when we get adults. I've been putting adults in in what do you call them? In
inverted commas.
yes. Because I feel like, you know, like we need to relearn everything again. And adults, as they are nowadays, they seem almost like, and I speak for myself, you know, I think we all can speak for ourselves. We seem a little bit infantile, not really.
I think we just lose big picture focus. Basically, we lose the ability to look at different things, and we narrow it more and more and more as we get older. So I say we learn more and more about less and less, you know, as we get older.
Yes, yes.
And
so basically it's a focus thing, right? I can you know, like in if you put it into the male and the female way of looking at things, right? The female way is like the whole, seeing the whole, you know, all inclusive, and the male is very focused and very like penetrating. We are very much on that penetrating way of looking at things, and we go very much into the detail, but then we forget to look at the whole, right? Everybody's looking at the tree, but they're not seeing the forest.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't even know. You know what? The reason kids pick this up so quickly, and when I say they pick, I come across maybe 2% of adults that pick this up, and 100% of children, little ones. And the reason is that kids accept that there's new knowledge. I will say, well, look at this state of the world. It's not good. You can show very quickly that it's our management. And I just say, look, we're not genetically designed to make decisions like this. This is a new way. And then you just go back to stick and stone tools and show how we only had to make social decisions. We didn't have to worry about anything else because we existed in balance with our ecosystem. And you just show kids like baboons or otters or other tool using animals making decisions, but they're not affecting their environment with their simple tools, and they're not managing their environment. They're only managing themselves within that environment. They're still very much a part of that environment, but they're not managing it. They're not manipulating the environment. But we go in and we develop fire, which enabled us to have more and more sophisticated tools and technology. And so the more sophisticated our tools became, the more our lives changed socially. And then we started manipulating our environment. And then we started actually managing nature and actually managing, we added a financial dimension at some point during that time. So we're genetically not born capable of managing the complexity that we are now managing. So what we do is, instead of adjusting our decision-making process when we started doing those things, because they're inseparable, we're not separate from our environment. And when people say, oh, but we can make decisions separately, I'm like, no, try go a day without food, water, and air, or a week, or whatever it is. Try, you know, everything we use or consume comes from nature. There's nothing separate. We're completely inseparable. You can't make money without nature. You can't do anything without nature. Read the Lorax or a shortened version of that. But so we added this complexity that's inseparable, but our genetic decision-making process is, let's deal with a social need, desire, or problem. That's all we had to think of. So we take that same decision-making process and we do that in an ecological context or an economic context. And so we view the world as either social, economic, or environmental when we're managing, but we can't. That's like trying to manage water by managing the hydrogen and the oxygen separately. We can't do that. But that's how we view the world, and that's how we also study it and manage it. So we study, we go into environmental sciences, we go into economic degrees and professions. We go into social work, and we have environmentalists that know nothing about economics. We have economists who know nothing about environment, yet those things are not separate. They are one thing. And that's like exactly like having, let's say, a government is managing a whole country, which involves people, economies, and nature. And the whole country's economy and physical and financial stability relies entirely on nature. Yet we have a Ministry of Economics, a Ministry of Social Welfare or Health, a Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Agriculture. And we're making those decisions in those isolated contexts. So it's like having a Ministry of Hydrogen and a Ministry of Oxygen. And then we get somebody who studied hydrogen, who knows nothing about oxygen. And we get an expert who studied oxygen to advise on that policy, who knows nothing about hydrogen. And neither of them have any idea what water is. And then wondering why our policies are buggering up the water. And that's exactly what we're doing in a nutshell. We're taking these inseparable things and making decisions for them separately. And all holistic management does is ensures that when you make that decision, you look at all three as one. So you still will get that expert advice, but you filter it to make sure that it's considering that whole perspective at one time.
So one of the things, like I kind of came across holistic management after so many years of permaculture design, but also it came to me at a time where I was very much into, you know, studying personal development, kind of reestablishing myself. I went through a phase that wasn't that was really challenging for me, and I started going full on into personal development. And this is then where kind of holistic management came across. And for me, it's the same approach that people do in personal development, right? Like they want to establish their own reality. And so they establish, okay, what are the experiences that I want to live? Who do I need to become to have these experiences? And what are the daily things that I need to do for becoming that person that then has these experiences? Or if you want to look at Lifebook, it's the same thing. I don't know if you know Lifebook from Mindvalley. It's basically you take your 12 areas of your life, health and fitness, and intellect, your character, your relationships, and all of that, and the people you want to live, where you want to live, what kind of house, career, and so on. And then you write about each of these subjects. What are the beliefs that I have? What do I want? Why do I want it? What are the strategies to get to it? And I started seeing that holistic management, by establishing your holistic context, is exactly this, but you're including the environment much more, and you're part of and a participatory, how do I put this, ingredient of the environment. You're completely like, again, you're inseparable.
You tie your physical and financial well-being to the environment because it's impossible to have it without it.
Exactly. So yeah. I really see it like that. This is, I kind of incorporated it into all the things that I do for myself in terms of my personal development, you know, like the guy that I want to become. I included this part into it. And many of my decisions that I then also make, like I have this program called Notion, and, you know, all the tasks that I need to do, I have the 7 context checks in it already incorporated to see, okay, wait, let me see, for already making it kind of a day-to-day routine of looking at things. Okay, is this actually doing something that is worthwhile for me and for the environment? And if not, then probably I put it at the side for probably later use or not. If like once it checks all of them. So now, where do I want to go? Do you still want to say something in regards to that?
Well, it's just, you know, at an individual level, we can already start to make better decisions relatively easily, and with a holistic context, of course, guiding your decisions. You're just always tying your well-being to the health of environment. But the problem we're facing is we manage everything at scale through our government. So, for example, it doesn't matter how good a farmer's intentions are on the ground, he's not being supported by the policy. So our governments, and because we have these isolated ways of managing things, and because we don't think of long-term consequences, we reach short-term objectives with no regard to the long-term inevitable social, economic, and environmental consequences. And also because institutions don't think like individuals. Even if every individual in an institution was a good person, we still couldn't have sound policies because institutions take on a life of their own. They're self-organizing and they're complex. So we're dealing with this monster at scale, and we have to break through in policy and ensure that we have socially, economically, and ecologically sound policies. And right now, how we view it is we know that our physical and financial well-being depends on nature, but we're still managing them in isolation of each other. So you've seen those three circles: people, planet, profit. Mm-hmm. But those three things, first of all, it's not profit, it's economies. But it's also, those three things are not three separate things that overlap in the middle. Those are one inseparable thing. You try isolate any of those things. And how I do this with the kids in their lesson is I give them a challenge and I say, okay, I want you to think of a financial transaction that doesn't involve people, money, and nature in the short and long term. And of course, they can't find anything because everything we use or consume comes from nature. So we just go through that, and then that shows that one circle. And that's also when we do the Play-Doh thing of putting them as a one. So that's what we need governments doing, is simultaneously managing that complexity. And right now they think they get in like interdisciplinary teams of scientists, but then it's narrowed down to the economic expert, the social, and the environmental. So it's always broken down into these manageable parts, no matter how much we look at the whole picture. At the last minute, at the decision, they've broken it down. So while we need all those experts, we need all the expertise, and we've got all the expertise we need people who can assist governments in managing complexity and filtering those decisions, just like you're doing in your daily life. But this is at scale. This is huge policies, and showing and testing for the short and long-term consequences, and of course basing everything on environmental health. And right now, agriculture is based on chemistry and the corporate marketing of oil and technology. It's become the most destructive, extractive industry on the planet, where it should be, of course, based on the biological sciences and regenerative things. And, that's institutional. So we're dealing with it at individual level where we can have incremental change, but we have to break through in a policy, because that's where we're managing at scale. And that's why things are snowballing so fast, because we're just using the same management that is causing our problems to try and solve our problems. So we're just speeding it all up.
So, sorry, I just got stuck here. So now, what do you think right now that is going on in regards to climate change, in regards to the narrative that is being used right now from United Nations and all these greater organizations like the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO. So what is going on in your opinion, from your perspective?
Well, have you seen the state of the world?
I have seen the same. Yes.
Yeah.
I just want to know exactly what your opinion is, because what I see right now is that, again, some kind of narrative is being pushed upon people, making people kind of fall into that guilt. And I've heard about climate change lockdowns or climate lockdowns, and I don't really think that that's in any way a solution. I'm still not buying the whole climate change story. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean that I don't know about desertification, habitat loss, flood and drought being a consequence of it, but more on a localized kind of microclimate way of looking at it, instead of just being like the whole planet is warming up. Because like I don't know, like I really wanted to know your point of view in regards to that.
Well, all these talks and conferences and stuff, it's just more of the same. They're using the same thing that creates the problems to try and solve the problems, which is just exacerbating the problem. And that's why it's all speeding up. And that's why if you have a problem and you don't address the root cause of that problem, you have no hope of solving it. We now know that the root cause of these problems is our inability to manage complexity. But luckily for us, we know how to manage it, except it goes against thousands of years of human beliefs in management, not even scientific beliefs, human just management beliefs. And throughout history, when there's new knowledge, adults are almost incapable of accepting new knowledge. And so individuals will accept it, as you can see is happening now. But throughout history, it's taken about 200 years before an institution has accepted that change. And we don't have the luxury of time on that one. And on the climate change thing, we're all focused on fossil fuels and all of these emissions and completely lost sight of the biggest cause of climate change. And those things are all to do with technology, which will be relatively easy to solve, because it's easy. If you don't like what it's doing, you can stop using it. You can change how you make it. You can come up with better technologies. That side of things is not going to be hard to solve because that's technological. On the management side, we're causing mass global biodiversity loss and environmental collapse. And that's the cause of the climate changing, because if you just think of one piece of bare ground and you take the temperature of it at midnight and at midday, compared to if it was covered with grass and plant litter, it would be much hotter at midday and much colder at night. So there's these extremes of temperature, not hot. I don't like the word global warming, because not warming, it's just more extremes of cold and hot, because we've got zero ground cover. Sorry, say that?
Volatility.
Yeah, and climate change. So now, because there's this bare ground on two-thirds of the planet, which is the desertification, the arid areas, and we're seeing increasing droughts, floods, poverty, poaching, all of these things, mass immigration to cities, wildfires. And that's a whole nother conversation with the ecological literacy side, which explains how those arid areas developed with huge herds of animals that were kept bunched together and on the move by their pack hunting predators. And then what we did was replace the role of those animals with fire, which destroys the grasslands, and it also results in fire-dependent vegetation. So our animal-dependent grasses, which are much more protein-dense and healthy for the animals, are disappearing. We're getting more and more fire-dependent grasses, which aren't healthy for the animals. So they turn to, we blame elephants. They start to hammer the trees that have more protein, because they're not getting the protein from the grasses, because we've messed up the balance of these ecosystems so much. And people wonder why we have fires, and that vegetation depends on fire to survive. And now it's just thriving. So these fires are going to get bigger and bigger and worse and worse. And I like my dad's comment the other day when someone said, "Oh, but the Aboriginals are experts at at managing fire and blah, blah. And he's like, well, of course they are. It's the only tool they've had for thousands of years. And we now have another biological tool because we know that fire doesn't work in those situations. So yeah, it's new knowledge that goes against belief that's not fact. That's just, we've believed it for so long, it's assumed scientific validity. And that's why kids pick this all up much, much quicker than adults, because they say, oh yeah, look at the world. We accept there's no ego with kids. Every time you speak to an adult, their ego gets dented. Like every time.
They're not educated, the kids.
The egos are engaged. I call it egos being engaged, and they're already looking for something complicated, and they miss the simplicity completely. Whereas the kids, and what we're finding in the schools, so I'm also doing this in rural schools. We've got a couple of rural schools engaged. And what we're finding, and I actually had a meeting with the chief of one area the other day. He called me in and I thought I was going to get in trouble because I had given them a boar that kept escaping. And I thought I was going to get in trouble for my pig eating people's crops and stuff. But he calls me in and he says, I'm seeing what's happening through the school children. They're going home and talking to their parents, and the parents are now being much more curious. So the egos aren't engaged when the kids come home and talk to them. So we suddenly have this huge movement and mobilization in this area where we've been trying to mobilize for a while. And it's because it's coming through their children. So we send the kids home with homework, basically, is effective rainfall demos, holistic context, tying your physical and financial stability to the health of the environment, collective decision making, etc. And the adults are accepting it through the children, rather than me, some stranger, going in there and saying, hey, this is what you need to do, because adults immediately go, they just block. Whereas kids just say, okay, well, that makes sense. It's logical, it's common sense. Don't need to tell me anymore. Like, let's get on and do it. And they get on and use the framework. And I've got 8-year-olds understanding why government policies are failing. And
I remember you know Bill Mollison, right? From Permaculture. Yeah. He used to say that as the problems of the world become increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple.
Exactly.
And the kids are kind of showing that, obviously.
100% completely. These kids are, it's ridiculously simple, and adults miss it completely because they won't just get on and do it. Because I showed the kids a policy on something, and the one 8-year-old said to me, but they only looked at one thing, Sarah. And I said, what should they have done? And she said, step back, and tested the decision. So, and I also walked into the classroom the other day, and the kid said to me, Sarah, our teacher made a reductionist decision that affected us socially, and it affected the environment. And what do we do? And I called the teacher in and I said, explain it to the teacher. And she was like, I didn't even think about that decision. I said, no, we don't. But these kids are understanding it. So now the kids are teaching the teachers.
So I'm getting really excited with this.
So exciting.
I'm loving it. I'm getting the goosebumps all over me all the time. So now there's so much stuff that I actually want to ask you, but how, so basically the way that I'm seeing it right now is you are the leading force in terms of bringing this kind of thinking and this kind of decision making to kids. And we definitely need more of that. So what would you see as being the next step for bringing this to more people? More teachers, more educators, more people that want to, that have the same intentions as you. Because in ThriveTribe Global, we have all these different areas. One of them is EcoTribe, where we speak more into ecology, but we have all these other areas that still need exactly the same teachings that I see that come from EcoTribe, that come from ecology, that come from nature. because nature is like, you know, like it's in everything. It's in us. We are natural beings. So what are the next steps? I like really, I think this is so crucial for people to understand and to bring this to more and more kids. Yeah, just I really want to emphasize that. And yeah, I want to know, like, where can we take a course with you or something like that?
So it's so exciting, and I'm so excited about it because I've been working on this on my own, just me, with the support of some amazing teachers and kids. And recently I felt so lonely because I've reached out and I've said to people, come on, we've got to focus on, and we've got to focus on junior school, not senior school. It's too late. It's junior school. They're little ones from grades 4 to 6 or 7. We already find they're starting to be blocked in grade 7, which is 12, 13 years old. So these little ones, and then I employed an amazing guy called Biani in the communal area. So it's just been me and Biani on our own, just with passionate teachers, with 3 or 4 passionate schools. And you know, every time I spoke to people, they would be like, yeah, we're interested in education. And then it would be older. And I'm like, no. Anyway, so the last week I did a thing with the Savory Institute Global Network to like reach out to see if there's anybody out there. And there was a lot of offer of support in doing like, you know, whatever, translating, just helping with stuff, because I'm putting it now into this workbook and I've got no experience in that. I'm not a teacher, you know what I mean? I don't know about all of these things, but I know that I have to put it into a very simple step-by-step workbook that I can use to train teachers. But even if the teachers aren't picking it up, you know, 100%, we can still get them teaching it in a way that the kids are picking it up. So that's what I'm trying to do now. And I have met a couple of other people that are doing it with little kids, but only from an agricultural perspective. So this workbook that I'm doing will be for every child on the planet, no matter where they are, no matter what they do, because it doesn't matter whether they live in cities or on farms, or whether they're a dentist or a ecologist or economist. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, every time they make a decision, they're affecting the environment. They are managing complexity. So it's going to be that level of understanding for every single human. I'm not going to isolate it and say I want to teach it as agriculture, or so one of the teachers wants to put it on the curriculum, and he said, will it go in environmental or agriculture? I said, neither. It's going to go in life skills. It's got to go in your everyday life decisions, because it doesn't matter. We don't have to be an agriculturalist or environmentalist. And then I was talking to the kids this morning, actually, the other thing that I said to them, you know, when we talk about the Lorax, and I said, he's only made decisions from an economic perspective, which is what most of us do, because we have to make money, you know what I mean? But then we have environmentalists getting so cross, saying, we have to do this, you can't use fertilizers, you can't do this, you can't do that. Nobody's going to, if you had a farmer, say, and he had a herd of cattle, and he's getting tick-borne diseases, and his land is damaged, he's got a high amount of ticks, etc. You can't say to him, don't dip. He's never going to make that environmental decision, because he's going to lose his herd and he's going to lose his income. So this is where we've got to tie it together. And if you only make it from an economic perspective, if he just dips his cattle, he's going to keep destroying the environment, which long-term will mean he won't have money anyway. And that's what I try and describe. Holistic management, you balance those things out. You know that your long-term physical and financial stability relies on that environmental health. So you're always making the best possible decision that will lead you towards that biodiversity. But at the same time, you've got to consider your own social and economic position. So I always say it's like a weaning process. When you start managing holistically, and that's why I don't like the word holistic, because it has just like hippie connotations, you know what I mean? It's just like holistic in this case just means tying ourselves to our environment. That's all it means. It's considering those things as one. So if I make that decision now with a holistic context, I'm going to make the best possible decision for the environment. That's my number one. But at the same time, I'm going to balance my economic, because I can't fail financially. And you're always making the best decision you can in your unique situation at any given time. So someone can't come along and say, you can't dip. Well, actually, I can't not. But I know that the environment is so important. So I'm going to look for a less environmentally damaging dip, for example.
You could also use guinea fowl, probably.
Well, no? And you can't just chop. That's again making a decision for one species and one thing. What you do is you start regenerating the environment using your tool of livestock, if that's what the tool that's required. And the next time you make that decision, you'll find you have more birds, more oxpeckers, guinea fowls, tick birds, better biodiversity, etc. So you're gonna. That's why also we don't just copy and paste. Every time you make that decision, the complexity is going to be slightly different. So it's a weaning process. You're always making the best decision you can in any situation, and you're always ticking towards a healthier and healthier and healthier and more regenerated environment, which will then start to cut your costs. Yeah, but you can't. So we've got all these environmentalists saying, do this, and there's just conflict across the world. Economists saying do this, and these people saying do this, and it's just like, we've got to balance those things. We can't force people to make environmental decisions if it's going to destroy their livelihoods. Nobody's going to do that. It's got to be a slow weaning process back to environmental health.
This is one of the things that I've been telling people, once I kind of got a little bit, there was a phase in my life where I was more like, maybe like a hippie, I could say, where I'm like, oh no, money is evil and I don't want to have it and we should not have money and all of that. Right now, or not right now, but like some years ago, I kind of changed my point of view and thought, wait, like, if there is no money involved in any of this, and we are right now living in this context, then nobody will be interested in ecological regeneration, right?
Yeah.
So now let's turn into somewhere else, and that is, like one of the main ideas to save the environment is reforestation. And I would love for you to speak into that a little bit, because I think, or I came to the conclusion that it's actually very much overrated, and that trees are just so charismatic. And actually, we've been thinking about a logo for ThriveTribe Global, and it's going to be a tree, it seems. Nevertheless, I would really love to see your point of view of that.
Well, I get very frustrated when people talk about, they'll talk about trees or they'll talk about bees. Like we have this very like, and I think, okay, trees, that's one species in trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of other plant and animal species that exist in these ecosystems. So if you think of a forest, it's not trees. It's trees and grass and bushes and microorganisms and animals and slugs and snails and squirrels and monkeys. So we zoom in again and we focus on one thing in this web of complexity that we will never even fathom. And even this morning, I had a couple of new kids in the class and they said something about trees. And I said, okay, even if we planted 1 billion trees tomorrow, what's going to happen? And I went through the context and the first, I said, ask the first context check question. If I take this action, am I addressing the root cause of the problem I'm trying to solve? Have I asked why we've lost the trees in the first place? Now, so we can plant all these trees and we're not addressing the management that's causing us to lose the trees, so we're just going to lose them. It's an absolute waste of treating a symptom. So we've got to again go back to management and address the fact that we're not tying our physical and economic stability to ecological health. So we're losing these forests, we're losing the trees, we're losing the grass, we're losing the birds. It's not just trees, it's everything. And I often say when it comes to grasslands, we can't see the grass for the trees because we've got these amazing, huge hardwood forests in Zim. And we've got all these people doing amazing work. They're good people doing amazing work planting trees. But the forests themselves aren't germinating because they're desert forests. There's nothing underneath. There's non-effective rainfall. And where we've been managing holistically and regenerating that forest underneath, as in all the other mineral cycle, water cycle, all of these things that have to be functioning, the 4 ecosystem processes, if those aren't functioning, you're wasting time. So once we do that, these trees are germinating. We don't have to plant them. They plant themselves, but right now they're not planting themselves, they're just dying. So, and that's the same, we focus on bees. Nick, how many insects are there in the world? How many pollinating insects are there? Yes, we love bees, and I love bees. I love every species though. So I'm trying to say, we're so used to zooming in, and we become so obsessed with planting a tree, saving a bee. If we all focused on the big picture, we would have everything come back without us having to do anything except change our management, change how we develop policies, and all those things, all those symptoms will automatically start to, nature knows what it's doing. We just have to manage it in a way that keeps it in balance. And us in balance, we're not separate to our environment. We are our environment. And all these, people focusing on making money. And I'm like, okay, can you make money if you destroy nature? No. So read that book, The Lorax. That's what's happening on a global scale. And see how we go in the next 30 years. When none of us are going to get out of this. And none of us are going to be able to make money. If money's your thing and you have a holistic context, you can still make money. But you're never going to do any of those things in the long term unless you change how we develop policy and our management.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. So you spoke about the 4 processes of ecosystem. Can you speak a little bit into that? And what it's one of the things that we are probably missing primarily in the way that we also look at ecosystem.
Yeah, well, you can look at it from a micro scale in your veggie garden to macro scale the whole planet, because the whole planet is one ecosystem. They're not separate ones. There's just separate climates and different climates and stuff, but the planet is one.
That still interact, all these different climates, right?
It's one. Yeah, there's just one whole ecosystem that ranges on a brittleness scale from humid to arid, but nothing is separate. And if we don't have those, and we talk about them as 4 ecosystem processes, they are all one, of course, but we teach. So you look for your water cycle, so how your water is cycling, your mineral cycle through the soil, through the air, and your community dynamics, which is your biodiversity of species, plant and animal, and how all of those are carrying that energy, those minerals, that everything through that cycle. And then it's all powered obviously by solar energy. So it's just basically how efficiently those 4 processes are working. And the more efficiently they are working, the better your environment, the better your everything, basically. So yeah, we look at those, whether we're literally out in the garden in a little school veggie garden or looking at it from a global perspective.
Beautiful. So how does permaculture design fit into this, and how, what would you consider to be like the differences between permaculture design and holistic management, and if there are any, or is it just a different lens that is being used to approach the situation?
Yeah, I think you can't I work with a lot of permaculturalists, and I call in a lot of permaculturalists to work with when we're doing like all the school veggie gardens and all of those sort of things, like people's houses and daily lives. The difference is, yes, permaculture can be a way of it. I do, you know, at a small scale, it's a great thing. You can't apply permaculture at policy level. You can't filter your policies through. So one is a management framework, and then there's the tool of holistic planned grazing, and one is an amazing thing for me. It's that smaller scale management and not management practice of making your systems efficient at a smaller scale. But yeah, we're talking about global management and global regeneration of the Earth's. The most important part is the Earth's grasslands, and the permaculture can't be used. I mean, there's things like swales and stuff, and that's been practiced for thousands of years, and again, treating a symptom. So it's just, I always think that, and the permaculturalists that I work with, they're like, this just makes permaculture much stronger. So my kids at this school, they learn permaculture. They have a permaculture lesson as well, but they filter those decisions through the holistic management framework. So it's fun. And there's just been like this sort of conflict, and it's just, again, an ego thing. And if you use this framework and you use it with your permaculture, it just makes it better.
I would say that if you really take the teachings of permaculture and the teachings of holistic management, that there is no this, there is only this, because it's
exactly.
You know, integrate rather than segregate is one of the principles. I don't know if Marlism ones or the other ones, and
they are very different things which complement each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I've been, you know, I was vegan for 3.5 years in my life. And right now I'm exactly on the on the opposite of it. I think I've shared this with you. I'm doing the carnivore diet. I'm eating some fruits and more fruits, not vegetables actually, because all my garden is some kind of food forest. I also have ducks and chicken. Definitely want to go and start with goats eventually at one point, because I think these are just beautiful animals. Now, how we've spoken about the reforestation, and now you've just mentioned the holistically planned grazing. And can you speak a little bit into that, and what is it exactly that makes it such a, like, the tool? It's like the tool right now that we really need on a global scale to reverse the problematic that we have in all these different ecosystem processes, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the thing is that we spoke about just now, the whole planet is one big ecosystem, and the only difference is the humidity, how rainfall is distributed throughout the year.
So the brittle scale.
Right? Yeah, so for example, I'm in Zimbabwe, and we go through a few months of rain, and then we have 9 months of nothing. So very dry, very arid. So that's a very brittle environment. Then you have places that are tropical with moisture throughout the year, very humid, and those pretty much have moisture in the air all year round, humidity, etc. And those areas of the planet developed with very different animals and in a very different way. So we have very arid and very humid. And when we look at those ecosystems, both, I call them sacred, you know what I mean? When we look at those areas, what's needed constantly is microorganisms to break down plant material. That's going on all the time. And in those humid environments, in all environments, the microorganisms that break down this plant material are activated by moisture. They need moisture. So in humid environments, they're active all the time. Constantly.
So moisture and temperature, like heat or higher temperatures, right?
Well, just moisture. They have to have moisture all the time to activate, to keep those guys activated. So in humid environments with constant moisture in the air all year round, they're constantly active. And they develop very differently. If you think of a rainforest, it's like smaller animals like slugs and little hedgehogs and sort of think of the woodland sort of little microorganisms and stuff. And then we go to the other side, which is where we are here. We've got vast areas of grassland. We have 9 months of super hot and cold and dry. Like during those 9 months, it goes to extremes, but it's very, very dry. And then just before the rains, it gets really, really hot. And it's totally dry. The humidity is very low, etc. And those lands developed with these huge herds of, you name it, from impala to buffalo to kudu to eland to elephants to guinea fowl to all of these animals that bunch together.
Real quick, this is in Africa, right? In North America, for example, you had like millions and millions of bison.
And
many other.
I think like 40 other species that they've lost. But so everyone focuses again on one species, but they lost loads of species before the bison. So the bisons were just a remnant of what herding animals they had. So
also some kind of elephant, isn't it? Some kind of I forgot the name. It's not like the mammoth, but like a smaller version of the mammoth. I think they had.
I'm not sure what they have, but I know that they lost 11 big animal species in the last.
And many of them were ruminants, right? That's because I think that's like one of the key principles or key aspects of these animals, right?
Yeah. And when I'm teaching kids here, I always say to them, okay, so we've got these huge herds of animals and they were kept bunched together and on the move by predators, lions, leopards, cheetahs, humans, all of these predators, apex predators, basically. And then you've got this huge herd going across these grasslands, under forests, there's still grasses, and they're going across, and you think of their different shapes and sizes of hooves. The little tiny impala have these razor sharp, pointy little hooves and their toes like split out, and those would break the surface of that soil. And imagine millions of them going across, just each hoof breaking, and then you get a different shaped hoof of another animal that's round, maybe breaking the surface in a different way. At the same time, they've all got different shaped mouths and teeth, and they all eat different levels of the grass. Like the impala will eat the tiny little delicate grasses all the way up to an elephant, like picking those big, really coarse grasses. And they're at the same time they're aerating that soil, they're also trampling that grass down flat. So,
and the majority, and they're peeing, right? And
at the same time, there's so they're trampling this grass down. There's dung and urine. People always talk about dung, but there's dung and urine. So they're trampling it down. The elephants will trample those big old coarse grasses. They're eating. They can't come back to it because they've dug and urinated all over that. But you form this amazing mulch, and then you think of the different shapes and sizes and textures of dung. And I had that aha moment with my kids the other day. I was like, oh, just think of it. Like they're all different. So they'll reach different levels of that grass, of that mulch. So all the dung would filter through to different levels because of the size and texture of it. So you've got this perfectly mulched layer. And then because the microorganisms are activated by moisture, so this is in the dry season, right? We've trampled it down. We've got this very dry grass going into long dry season. And we've got, where do we get the moisture? through the ruminants' guts, through those animals' guts, and in the dung and urine. So now they've been triggered to activate, and they can start breaking down that beautiful plant stuff and ready to catch that rain. As soon as it rains on this thick mulch, filters down through all those different roots and underground into our rivers. And right now we don't have those numbers of animals. There's a symbiotic relationship. So if those grass plants stay upright after the rains, the sunlight can't reach the roots. So those plants start to die. It starts to turn to chemical oxidation and it dies, which is why resting arid areas causes desertification. Resting areas in humid areas, it will recover because those microorganisms are activated differently. They're active all year. They don't rely on this symbiotic relationship with these big herds. So rest is an amazing tool in non-brittle environments. Rest is magical. You just leave that land and it will recover. No matter how much you damage it, it will come back, it will recover. Resting, which is one of the tools we use here and in other arid areas. Look in the States, the terrible desertification where they've taken everything off that land. It's dying because there's a symbiotic relationship between herds, predators, microorganisms, grasses, all of these things. And it's just so, it's such a common sense once you hear it like that and once you understand how that works. And so what we did when we started eradicating all these herds, we started wiping out the numbers, causing imbalance, causing them to behave unnaturally, so rest causes desertification in those areas, but so does overgrazing. So it's all about timing. Everything is about the timing of these animals. So overgrazing, if they stay too long, they will damage the plants. If they're not there at all, they'll damage the plants. Then we try to replace their role with fire. So we still burn every year, billions of hectares of land. So we burn it all, which is just rapid oxidation, leaves the ground bare, leaves the soil exposed, and also, like I said, encourages more and more fire-dependent vegetation. And sometimes fire is a tool that would have to be used, but not in these situations. And fire wouldn't occur naturally in these dry seasons, but because rest and fire are the only tools we've had for millennia or millions of years, that's all we know. And so now what my father worked on for over decades and decades was studying this symbiotic relationship between herds and people, and grasslands and people, obviously. And then he was being taught in university that livestock cause damage, elephants are causing damage, and then what he was observing in the field and what he was being taught at university were two very different things. And he was like, oh, we're wrong. So he became an independent scientist. He quit university and started doing experiments with using livestock as a tool. And that's what led on to all of this, because he realized at the end, because he was doing like experiments with grazing systems, which obviously won't work because what you're managing is not systematic. So that's how all of that side of things came about. And then the grazing process with the livestock to mimic nature and taking into account the full complexity of the situation. That's when that came about, and he realized no grazing system can ever work in the long term, because they would have some successes with grazing systems and then they would fail. And that's when he discovered that, sort of by accident, the whole management of complexity, and he was like, oh, we're not taking in the full complexity of the situation and using a planning process which enables us to adjust to all the variables going on all the time. That's also quite a long other conversation, but we now have the tool of holistic planned grazing process to use. And here in Zimbabwe, up in Vic Falls, we've been using the tool of livestock for about 20 years now, and the production of the land is just crazy. Where next door we've got national parks that are the worst example of biodiversity loss, and we blame elephants. We've got more elephants because they're attracted to the increased biodiversity, and they're not causing damage because they've got food. They're predominantly grazers. They've got grass. They're not putting pressure on trees. So we attract a lot of wildlife to the area, and we use this amazing tool of a herd of livestock, which I love because they make the magic happen, right? They're regenerating the land. We take into account all the livestock movements the wildlife movements, because of course it's all about wildlife. Like, this is why this whole thing was born, was out of a passion for wildlife and the people that live amongst them. And then I heard some people talking about culling elephants again 2 days ago, some top conservationists in Zim. And I was just like, we culled in the 60s, we culled 40,000 elephants, and the desertification got worse. Not because we have too many elephants, but because when we set aside these areas as national parks, what did we do? The first thing we did was take people out. And that's an apex predator. We took an adult elephants only predator out of those ecosystems. And what happened to the elephants? They stopped moving naturally, hung around, overgrazing, over trampling, etc. And then here's the reductionist decision from the consequences why everything is snowballing, because then we didn't look at that management decision that was reductionist, and then we made a decision and blamed the elephants and culled, and the desertification got worse. And then we just keep making that decision because we're not very quick learners, are we?
This reminds me very much of that TED Talk. I don't know who it is from. He's the title was When Wolves Change Rivers. Yeah. Where they reintroduced, I think that was Yosemite National Park. Yes, they reintroduced the wolves, and it changed the whole landscape because the deer wasn't able to come down anymore because it needed to hide from the wolves, and so the beavers had their space again, because like you would have the willows growing at the margin of the rivers again, and so the beavers had material to work with, and so they started making dams, and so the whole landscape changed only because of that reintroduction of the wolves. And basically, it's what you're saying is exactly the same. We really only need to reintroduce either the predators, the apex predators, into the ecosystem. Obviously, it's a little bit more complex, but like, it's really necessary to have them. Or like, since we don't have them, for example, here in Portugal or wherever you want to live, right? You don't want to have wolves next to your your farm, probably. At least at the beginning, while the ecosystem is not stable enough. They use electric fencing, right? So that's an appropriate technology for this kind of situation.
Well, again, if you ran it through your holistic context and check the balance, but when it comes to the tool of using livestock, so you can't just say you have to reintroduce a predator, because you might not have the balance of the herding animals. So it might actually cause more harm than good. Again, zooming out, not treating that symptom, zooming out, changing the management. So what's happening with where we are is the more the biodiversity increases, the more it's encouraging these things to sort of just come back naturally. And they removed, so this is where the global, like we talked a bit about veganism just now and whatever, the disconnect that we have with our environment is absolutely terrifying, because we have people living in cities that are so disconnected from what's natural they don't even know where their food comes from. Not just meat. it's everything. And this sort of emotional, over emotional thing about, you know, nature doesn't think about the individual, it thinks about the whole. We think nature is cruel when we watch a buffalo get taken out, or a cute little whatever getting eaten, but that's how nature is taking care of the strength and genetics of the whole. So they'll take out the weak, the slow, the this, the that. So you've always got the strongest genetics coming through. There's a plan, and we can't get emotional about this thing that's so much bigger than us. You know, so my kids have, and this is the disconnect, is we've got people in cities going, oh, shame, the poor little,
We'll lose you.
Whatever, like, sorry.
Yeah, I just lost you for a second, and I'm not seeing you move right now. So can you repeat your kids? You were saying?
My kids they love animals and they love nature, and they have, at home we have loads of animals, and they grew up with an elephant, an orphaned elephant, and you know, but they're also very practical. Like, they understand how nature functions, and they will go and watch people slaughtering a goat or a cow, and yeah, they don't love it, but they're not, you know what I mean? They're like, oh yay, mom, we're gonna have oxtail tonight or whatever. And I've also taught them, like, that animal has had the best life, because we don't buy anything that's been factory farmed, and that's meat or vegetable, to the best of our ability, and definitely meat, like, you know. So it's just this connection to nature, and what we think is cruel. Like, my kids will see lions taking something. I mean, the other night we were driving and a leopard took an impala right next to the car, and you don't say, oh, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, that's nature. And you know, when we slaughter an animal, if it's humane and quick, that's all I care about. It's much quicker than it being chased down for 7 hours by a herd of wild dogs, you know,
eaten alive or something like that,
eaten
right?
alive. So you know, it's just, look, I 100% no factory farms, no nothing. But at the same time, this whole vegan movement, it's like, well, where do you think your cereal comes from? Where do you think your clothes come from? How has that been produced? It's how things have been produced, and that's killing far more animals than one regeneratively raised cow or goat or sheep or pig, or, you know. So again, it's just common sense. It's just being practical. It's being connected to our environment, always being connected to what's over, like, dramatic. I mean, we had an American teenager in Vic Falls once, and she saw the herd of livestock and she screamed. She said, what are those? What are they? We're like, what? That's the cattle, that's the herd, that the tool that we use to regenerate this place for wildlife. And I said, do you eat burgers? And she's like, yeah. So, well, there you go, that's where that comes. No idea, no clue. So if we're bringing up kids that have no idea where their food comes from, it's insanity. How do they live every day? You know, and just being balanced and always looking at how something is produced. It doesn't matter what the product is. How has it been produced? At the end of the day.
The nutritional quality of the meat now specifically is so much higher than non-holistically raised or regenerative meat, right?
Yeah, completely. I mean, those
different
factory farmed animals is not good.
Yeah, the plants go much deeper with their root system. You have much more perennial plants than annual plants, right? And
also you're encouraging so many more insects and birds and wildlife, and so if it's regenerative, it's regenerating that whole environment and encouraging more and more life. I mean, if you go into these places that have that have desertified, you won't find these insects or birds. We're killing everything, like all these species that we're not thinking about. Billions of them, gazillions, and it's not, I find it becomes very much a case of out of sight, out of mind. Oh, that's a plant, it's fine. You know, no, it's not. How's it being produced? What have they used? Who's it affected? What's it affected? Follow that chain of production. Go into it a little bit more and try and stay with a little bit of practicality and common sense and connect to nature. Like,
yeah, one of the problems that you that I remember your father had in one of the documentaries that I watched was you had too little animals because the grasses were growing too quick, right?
Yeah, so basically couldn't keep up with the production of the land, and so there's not enough in that herd, that tool. There's not enough animals to get that grass down flat. So we've got cattle, sheep, and goats that herd together. We've got the guy in the front that controls the speed of the herd. We've got the flanker herders that control the density depending on what needs to be done. And we've got the guy at the back that keeps them bunched together. But we didn't have enough to get down that grass flattened and down in time. So we were losing grass because remember, if I said it stays upright, it oxidizes and dies. So that's another issue like that. It just gives you some idea of the amount of animals needed. And like I said, we've just got those 3 species. That's when we need like the biodiversity of wildlife. We need all those different shapes of hooves and mouths and dung and everything to keep these ecosystems like in top health, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, the energy cycling is like it gains momentum, and at one point you're like you keep up with it or you start losing it, isn't it?
Exactly. So it can be a reverse cycle or a positive cycle. So right now we're in a positive feedback loop. But again, so we are just increasing the herd quite a lot. But again, you know, everything is in holes, right? So where we are is like this pocket, but we need it to go bigger and bigger and bigger because whatever we do or whatever the neighbors do will affect what's happening with us. And if there's rain on the next door land which is desertified, our river will like start to flood, you know, and it will get dirty. But if we have rain on where it's regenerated, our river will fill up over the next couple of weeks, and that water is crystal clear. You can drink it. There's no flooding. And we have water all year round. Whereas next door in the national parks, which is the best land management we know, which is the highest example of biodiversity loss in the world, and we're blaming elephants, but we have more elephants than those areas because they're attracted to the better biodiversity, and we have water all year round. And that's just through a change in management and a new tool.
So we're almost coming to like the 19-minute mark. And it's been amazing. I could stay here, talk to you about these subjects for a day or two. So what would be one thing that everybody individually could do to participate in this transition, right? We through this conversation, we understood that there's a transition that is needed. We can't just make it cold turkey, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna stop doing that now and I will start doing that now. We really have to kind of move through probably the context checks, right? But what would you say for everybody that is listening to our conversation? What is one thing that they can start doing today that will have an impact in the future? That is, you know, like according to this intention of regenerating nature and making the world a better place, having in consideration the whole.
Well, exactly. That is my advice to any human on the planet is we cannot exist without nature. Everything we use or consume comes from nature, and our physical and economic stability is inseparable from it. So learning that none of us are born with the ability to manage the complexity of people, economies, and nature. But luckily for us, we can learn to do it. And this framework, the holistic management framework, which just means always making sure your decisions are tying your physical and economic stability to environmental health, with a couple of questions if you're not sure if that decision is the right one, or if you're confused between a couple of decisions. At an individual level, this decision-making process is super, super simple. But my sort of plea for our children's future is that we get more people focusing on putting pressure on our governments. We just need to break through in one government, in one policy, in an agricultural policy would probably be the best way to start, to change how they develop that policy, and to develop the first ever agricultural policy in history where we would end up producing more food than dead eroding soil. And I think if we just manage to break through with one government, getting them to filter those policy decisions through this framework, tying the entire nation's physical and economic stability to environmental health, and produced a truly regenerative agricultural policy, then we would definitely change the world within a very short period of time. It would start like a domino effect, because this has never been done before. This is like real turning point in our history. And if we don't turn it, we're going to see the end of civilization as we know it, because we're just using this same thinking that's creating these increasing global problems to try and solve them, which is absolutely pointless. But it can be done, and it can be done simply if we just collectively see this same.
It's really it's really just tapping into the power that is already in nature, right?
100%. Like, nature always looks at the whole. Yeah.
Amazing. So you have various channels through which you put your content out. I know that you have your YouTube channel. I will share that one here. Do you have any other channels that you use?
I do use, I put everything sort of on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and I've started using LinkedIn quite a lot more. I do sometimes use Twitter, but not as much, which I probably should.
When is the workbook coming out?
Soon. Soon. I've just started writing it. I've gathered up some workbooks that I'm looking through to get a feel for what I like and stuff like that, and what flows. And I'm chatting to teachers now about all these things that flow. And then I'll develop the first one. It'll be Zimbabwean with the characters of my book in it. And then I'm hoping to have like different countries with different characters and stuff in the workbook that all the kids can relate to. Because at the end of the day, we're all the same. We all want the same thing. We all want physical and economic stability and health and happy lives with family and friends and all of these things. But we cannot have that if we don't have ecological health. So we have to tie those things together.
Beautiful. Yes. So what would you say is like the biggest lesson that you've had from, with holistic management and getting to know more about, what's going on? Like,
the biggest lesson I've had is teaching this to young children, and I would get quite I'd feel despair every time I spoke to adults because they weren't picking it up, and when I speak to children and they just pick it up and they get it, and they're teaching me all the time. They're teaching me to simplify it, which is helping me at the policy level, etc., and getting through to adults much easier. And I'm not doing my job until I can easily get through to adults. And through teaching children, I'm having a lot more success in in getting through to adults, if that makes sense. It's just simplification of something very simple, but you can't learn that unless you teach it. You have to teach it in a simple way. And I used to get very upset when adults wouldn't get it, and now I don't. Now I just say, okay, well, let me teach children and learn more, and I'll come back to you when I'm ready.
It's so funny that you actually speak into the things that I've been thinking. like the moment I start thinking about something, you start speaking into it. Like I was thinking about vegan. I had mentioned it at the beginning, and then in the middle, I wanted to speak a little bit more about it, and you just spoke into it. And now exactly the same. Now, and that is that point, you know, like one of the things that happened to me when I started studying and looking more into permaculture design was, you know, like one fear that I had, you know, like we were writing down our fears about the course and all of that, was that I would get more upset with the world as the more I learned about how wrong things are. And I would really love to know how you deal with that.
It's so hard. It's so hard. Like I've had to become very, very, very emotionally tough, I think, in a lot of ways, because, you know, I'll go on, especially in Zim, and we go out on sort of little holidays to different places, and I see the desertification, and I hear people blaming elephants, and I listen, and I work with a lot of people that have their egos very tied to those sort of things, and I just have to keep quiet, because some people you're just not going to get through to, so you just have to keep quiet. But it is very hard, and I just wish that people could see these things through the lens that I see them through this bigger picture clarity, which the kids are starting to do, and not some adults definitely, but it is a very I have to emotionally distance myself very, very often, and then when I'm feeling very sort of I go and teach the kids, and then I feel inspired again. I'm like, okay, well, we can do this if we focus on the children.
Do you meditate?
I do. I do a lot of Wim Hof breathing, meditation, yoga, long walks.
You have cold water there? No, you probably.
Yeah, I'm a pansy about the cold water thing. I've tried dry.
I have my natural pool right in front of me, and like when I wake up in the morning, I that's one of the things that I do. I go into the cold water. Now in the winter in Portugal, it's much better, but not so much in the summer. For the summer, I probably need a chest freezer that, you know, with water in there. But it's really helpful.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've been doing that breathing for like 2 years. It's amazing. Keeps me sane. And then teaching children, I just think through the children we'll get through to adults much, much, much better. Yeah,
they are the teachers, really, isn't it?
100%. Yeah. Because this is holistic management is a heartfelt thing, isn't it? It's asking people to make decisions for their own unique situation. Like somebody else can't tell you what to do. Only you know what to do in your unique social and economic situation. So nobody else can tell you what to do until you've tested that decision for yourself. You won't know.
So Sarah, we are on 1.5 hours, 19-minute mark. I am so thankful for your time, and I really want to acknowledge everything that you're doing. It's beautiful to see this development, and I'm super curious about your workbook, and let me know if there's any way that I can help you with it. If we definitely will have, we're still growing. ThriveTribe Global is growing, and it's becoming bigger, and it's, you know, it's definitely, we will need more of you and more people like you and more of your content. And I have no words for how thankful I feel for what you're doing, and for this interview as well.
Well, it's all about connecting with other people doing that. And I'm so excited for this workbook for the first lot to come out, because then other people can add, and it'll just grow, I think. And that's what I'm hoping, is more people will be interested in the junior school, like the young kid education, and we can just grow it from there.
Beautiful. So thank you so much. Anything else that you still want to say? And anything you want?
Thank you. And let's get this out there, especially at policy level. Policy and kids, I think those are the two that we have to focus on.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Karsten.
Wait. Recording stop.